Hello true crime fans and welcome to Behind the Yellow Tape. You are listening to our most comprehensive and extended presentation on the case of Kelly Ann Bates, a murder so savage and systematic that it permanently altered the landscape of domestic abuse prosecution in the United Kingdom. This is an exploration of unprecedented cruelty, the mechanics of total control, and the enduring questions surrounding intervention. We delve into the deepest, darkest aspects of this case. Listener discretion is strongly and repeatedly advised. Kelly Ann Bates, born in 1978, was a vulnerable teenager, a young woman navigating a difficult transition to adulthood. Her family background, while private, contributed to a perceived need for an anchoring figure, a vacuum that an abuser could easily fill. This search for stability made her susceptible to manipulations of a predatory individual like James Patterson Smith. She sought a relationship that offered the illusion of adult stability and affection. Her friends and family likely voiced concerns about the profound age difference. Smith was 49, Kelly was 17. But the powerful draw of a controlling relationship can often override warnings. For a teenager, the attention from an older man, initially presented as maturity and care, can be deeply compelling. James Patterson Smith systematically employed all the tactics of an abuser to establish total control. He was not just physically abusive, he was an architect of psychological imprisonment. He likely managed all financial resources, ensuring Kelly had no independent means to leave or sustain herself. The rapid process of cutting Kelly off from her family and friends was meticulously executed. He moved her into their shared house, making their address a fortress and cutting off her lifelines. This left her with no one to confide in, no one to observe her deteriorating condition, and no one to seek help from. Before the final fatal stage of torture, the relationship was characterized by the abuse cycle. Tension building, explosive violence, followed by a honeymoon phase of apologies and false promises. This phase, however, appears to have completely ceased in the final weeks, replaced by continuing, escalating terror. The 1990s in the UK, while a time of increasing awareness, still operated under a social paradigm where domestic violence was often viewed as a private family matter. The focus of the legal system was heavily weighted toward proving intent on the moment of death, rather than recognising a pattern of prolonged abuse leading to homicide. The Kelly Ann Bates case would profoundly challenge this view, forcing the courts to grapple with the legal implications of systematic torture as a form of premeditated murder. The evidence clearly demonstrated that Kelly did not die due to a single eruption of violence, but through a calculated month-long process of physical and psychological destruction. The medical evidence regarding Kelly's deprivation was crucial. Dr. Lawler provided testimony on the specific psychological effects of the calculated starvation and dehydration. She had significant weight loss of 3 stone, and this resulted in severe muscle wasting, a state known as cachexia. This rendered her muscles weak and compromised her immune system, making her unable to mount any effective resistance to. The severe dehydration would have put her into a state of hypovolemic shock, a life-threatening condition where the body has sufficient fluid to carry out normal functions. Her physical collapse was not random, it was a predictable outcome of Smith's deliberate actions. The combination of malnutrition and physical trauma meant her organs were already failing long before the final act, making the final mechanism of death far easier for the killer to execute. The catalogue of over 150 injuries was meticulously documented. Injuries included cigarette burns, evidence of being struck with belts and blunt instruments, and defensive wounds showing she tried to shield herself. But the deliberate blinding of Kelly stood alone in its horror. The pathology report detailed how the removal of Kelly's eyeballs was performed with a calculated force that suggested not random rage, but a chilling intent to maim and terrify. The age of the wounds suggested Smith lived with a blind, tormented and completely helpless Kelly Ann Bates for several weeks. This was the ultimate expression of Smith's sadism, to ensure his victim could not even perceive the world she was being forced to endure. The reports show that Kelly's eyes was removed 3 weeks before her death. They even found stab wounds inside her eye sockets. This sustained period of torture, far removed from the public eye, allowed the prosecution to argue the case was an aggravated murder, a systematic attempt to reduce a person to a non-human state before delivering the final blow. While details are scarce due to the nature of the case, testimony suggested Kelly may have attempted to leave or seek help on prior occasions. Victims of this level of abuse often return to their abuser due to threats, financial dependence, manipulation, or even Stockholm Syndrome. Smith's complete control meant that any fleeting attempts at freedom would have been met with severe retaliation and re-isolation, reinforcing the message that her only refuge, however horrific, was with him. This cycle of control and return is a common tragic element in high lethality domestic violence cases. The inevitable happened and Kelly died. Smith called the police and said it was accidental. Police immediately arrived at the site and understood the gravity of the situation. Smith's calm demeanour and ready-made lie about an accidental drowning during an argument were immediately suspicious. During his initial interview, Smith attempted to portray Kelly as a volatile and prone to self-harm, a common tactic used by abusers to deflect responsibility. However, the scene, marked by blood splatter throughout the house and the visual state of the body, rendered his narrative unbelievable from the start. The prosecution, led by Peter Openshaw, was faced with a complex legal challenge, proving not just murder, but the specific intent to torture. Their strategy relied on the sheer weight of the medical evidence. They argued that over 150 injuries, each in a different stage of healing, proved the systematic nature of the abuse. This refuted any claim of a sudden loss of control. The deliberate blinding was used as the defining piece of evidence for malice aforethought, the legal term for premeditation. No fit of rage could explain such a calculated, sustained act of mutilation weeks before death. By presenting the physiological facts of cachexia and hypovolemic shock, they destroyed the defence claim that Kelly's final injury was accidental. She was far too weak to fight, and the circumstances pointed to a forced drowning. Smith's defence primarily sought to introduce doubt about the timing of the injuries and leverage the victim's vulnerability to suggest Kelly contributed to her own physical state. Their attempts were ultimately futile. The judge, Mr. Justice Sachs, ensured that the jury understood that even if Kelly had attempted self-harm, the vast majority of injuries were external, violent, and inflicted by the defendant. The defence failed to explain the catalogue of internal and external trauma or the deliberate blinding. The jury's swift 1-hour guilty verdict on the charge of murder was a definitive rejection of the defence's entire position. The Justice Sachs sentenced James Patterson Smith to life imprisonment. His sentencing remarks were direct and reflected the public shock and revulsion. He recommended a minimum term of just 20 years. This was a landmark recommendation in 1996 for a murder that was not gang-related or serial in nature, underscoring the severity of a killing born of systematic domestic torture. The judge stated that the crime was one of such profound degradation and inhumanity that it warranted a severe tariff, setting a clear precedent for how the courts would henceforth view homicide preceded by prolonged sadistic abuse. In the years following the case, the murder of Kelly Ann Bates continued to draw public attention, especially as James Patterson Smith approached his mandatory parole review period. The case served as a rallying cry for victims' advocates, who argued that individuals convicted of such depraved systematic torture should serve life terms. The public outrage and the lobbying against his potential release are a testament to the enduring memory of Kelly's suffering and the need for accountability in extreme cases. The process of parole for such a high-profile, heinous crime remains a difficult balance between legal requirements and social demand for justice. Ultimately, Kellyanne Bates' horrific death, revealed through meticulous forensic work, became a profound, if tragic, catalyst. It galvanised movements that led to legal reforms, recognising the patterns of coercive control, the very mechanism that killed her. Her case forced the police, social services, and the judiciary to acknowledge that domestic violence is a continuous, escalating crime, and that murder is often the final act in a prolonged narrative of torture. Her story is a permanent, painful inscription in the history of British criminal justice, demanding that we never look away from the signs of abuse and that we prioritise the intervention that could have saved her life. Thank you for listening today, and remember, stay behind the yellow tape.